You're tuned in to the Andrew Lawton Show.
I want to talk about this story that we touched on Monday that really struck a nerve with a lot of people, myself included, and that was the police stakeout in Elmer, Ontario at the Church of God, where Pastor Henry Hildebrandt oversaw a service in the parking lot, a drive-in parking lot service where all the cars would tune into the sermon on an FM radio and listen to the church service the way they normally would, except instead of doing what many churches like my own are doing with having Zoom calls and Facebook streams and all that, they were doing it live and not in the flesh necessarily, but live and in the car, which I thought was a fantastic way to have the sense of community that church gives and also maintain social distance. Well, Elmer, Ontario police had a different idea. They were filming every car going in. They were filming the service and now have handed it over to the Crown prosecutors. And the Crown is now reviewing the evidence, which means watching a church service, which I guess can't hurt them, and then decides whether they will advance this by laying charges or not, or by directing police to lay charges, which is just so asinine. I mean, the title of my show the other day was Criminalizing Church, because that's really what's happening here. And the one police officer had said people will be held accountable. And they were saying just because no one laid a ticket on Sunday doesn't mean that we won't down the road. So I find this to be just horrendous and such an overreach. And I want to talk about this in a bit more depth with the pastor who's presiding over these drive-in services from the Church of God in Elmer, Ontario. Pastor Henry Hildebrandt joins me on the line now. Pastor, thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So these are so difficult, these times that we're living in, for churches, for all organizations and institutions now. And I know that a lot of organizations are finding their own ways to adapt electronically. Why not do that? Why not do the Zoom services or the Facebook streaming? Why do this parking lot drive-in service?
Well, it seems to me that we're not alone, because all over the world, not just in Canada, but all over the world, you see there's a rapid moving towards rather doing it. It's when you have the visual, it makes all the difference. It's one thing to sit at home and hearing somebody somewhere, not knowing where they are, or you come to the parking lot and you see the person, you see the action. I mean, after all, when we preach, half of our preaching is by actions, right?
Yeah, so I guess, though, there is an element of this where a lot of people are going to think this is just about rabble-rousing. Is it about that, or is there something more fundamental in the service that you're doing here?
There's something very, very fundamental here, very fundamental. And that is that when you see that the liquor store is essential and church is not, that is serious.
It's an interesting point you bring up there, because when the Ontario order went in initially and we saw the list of all the businesses that were essential, I mean, there were very few that weren't essential. And it is interesting that people waiting in a line in a grocery store, waiting in a line in a Costco, where there's similar exposure to what you could replicate in a church, you could put the same spacing there, that the two are, from a health perspective, very similar, but from a legal perspective now are not.
Exactly. And that's exactly where we should be right now. It's exactly where we should be. We should be in our church buildings and space like they want us to do it, but we are left far behind, and that's what troubles me extremely, very much.
Okay, so you raised an important point there. This isn't because you don't agree with the importance of social distance or because you don't agree with the seriousness of the pandemic.
I see what they're saying, I listen to what they're saying, and I want to cooperate far fully.
Because you said in a press release that went out yesterday that no laws were broken and all safety guidelines were followed. Did you get legal advice on this before you did these drive-in services, or at least before the story blew up like it did last weekend?
Well, we were there. We started, at first was where the 50 people were still allowed, and then it went down further, and then 5 people and whatnot. So then we had these drive-in services, and the police came and checked it up, and they said, all good.
So the police actually were at the previous services and raised no issues. And this is, I think, the one last Sunday, the 3rd, as I understand it. But police had been to the first 2 and flagged no concerns.
They were there for the first 2. checked it up, because obviously they have to respond if the call comes in. They came and they found no breaking of the law in any shape or form, and they said enjoy. So it was all good until this last one.
So why now? Why change? Because the messaging that we saw from the police in the National Post, in the London Free Press, that one line that really sends chills down me is people will be held accountable, as though some mass subversion of the law has taken place here. Why has the tone changed from those first two services to the one most recently?
So the police had no problem with it whatsoever. Like we said, they were there before. But why that all of a sudden changed was because of the Facebook postings that people do, and we all know how much value, how much weight they carry. But anyway, so they responded to that, and the police thought that there was so many calls that came in. I think it was 15. So they thought that was enough reason to shut us down, I guess.
And I don't know if you know who the complainants are, but you're convinced that these were just people that saw it on Facebook, not even people necessarily that were in the community and impacted by this or drove by and saw it firsthand.
Yes, the chief admitted to that it was that. So people were driving by and making assumptions, and we followed that all Sunday afternoon. Saw exactly what was happening. So we were not surprised when the police said that. We knew exactly where he got his information from was Facebook, because people said, well, there was nobody in the car. We were all in our cars. The building was closed. So that was an assumption they made, and that's what the police chief based his information off of the I guess we could say fake news of the Facebook.
And I noticed that you even had signs telling people to put their windows up. So even if there was a possibility that someone would say the windows being down posed a risk, you seem to have gotten ahead of that one.
We were ahead of that one. We were very, very careful. We were actually the safest place in town at that point.
Let me ask you then about where you see this going, because the story in CTV as of this morning is that the Crown is assessing whether you've broken the law or not. There's a lawyer quoted in the story who says because no one got out of their cars, it's not a gathering in his view. But I think the one thing we've learned in the last few weeks is that a lot of people are making this up as they go. So I don't know if anyone knows the actual definition here. But is there a part of you that is wanting to get ticketed just so you can fight it and prove the point? Or do you just want everyone to leave you alone so you can go back to doing these Sunday drive-ins as long as that's what's required?
Well, I think I proved my point that the first few weeks that we were there, we didn't try to get any attention. The police came and they said, enjoy, it looks good. So we were just happy to continue right on. It wasn't us that caused this. It was the police that said, no more. Before was good, now it's no good. So, and like I said, there's there's other provinces, a number of them in Canada, there's other countries in Europe and others that are going this way. It's just, you can't have proper fellowship sitting at home and just listening to someone. You can do it for a time or two, but that's not holding through. We need to see one another. We need to have that fellowship, if you will.
Yeah, that is such an important part, and people don't understand if they aren't from within the church, I think, the importance of that. I mean, people get speaking with their friends and stuff, and my church has moved to a lot of Bible studies online and fellowships online, and you can replicate some of that community, but it's not the same thing. It's not the same thing as shaking a hand, as breaking bread, and doing all of these other things that are as much a part of church as the sermon.
That's exactly it. You just cannot do it. And that's why I'm saying this issue now goes far, far beyond me or our church. This affects all of us. And when we put the police in front of the church building to make sure nobody enters, but we have the liquor store open, that to me is now we're talking. This is serious. It's not about me or our church. It's about religious freedom, and that's very, very serious where we are now.
When you mention religious freedom, I guess I have to ask if you think that this controversy is only taking place because you are a pastor and this is a church, or do you think this is just a general overzealousness from law enforcement that would happen in any circumstance?
Well, I think they took it for granted that they could do with that whatever they wanted to, that the church people would be glad to just stay at home, and they definitely found one in me that is not happy to stay home, and the same with our people, and the same with many, many, many other people. Church is essential to us. The Bible says man shall not live by bread alone. So we don't live just off of the grocery store. We have to have our spiritual food.
Have you had a discussion or a thought process, or have you reached a decision if you get a ticket as to whether you will pay it or whether you will fight it and make this bigger point if necessary in court?
I am not concerned about that at this point at all. We have tremendous support coming in from all over. I am not worried about that. That's not my concern. Is I want to make sure that I as a pastor fulfill my duty in feeding the people and do my best I can the way we're going about it. But they'll have to figure all of that out. I'm a preacher. I'm not a lawyer.
Let me ask you here something, Pastor. How big is your parking lot? Because it sounds like there are a lot of people that might have the only opportunity to have this type of service by driving to Elmer on Sunday or in a couple of weeks, perhaps. So can you accommodate the influx if a lot of people say, hey, you know what, I'm not getting this anywhere else, I'm going to check them out?
So what we're going to do is we're actively looking into finding a huge parking lot somewhere and putting up big screens. People are calling from all over the place. People are coming for this Sunday from hours away. They said they feel the same way as we do. We cannot do without gathering at least sometimes. So we're going to accommodate that. We're going to do what we can. Our parking lot, I'm not sure how many it holds, probably about 70 cars or so, I would think. So we're looking into to see what we can do where we can accommodate people, because it goes far beyond 70 cars at this point. People from all over want to attend the service because that's just the nature of your heart, your soul desires to be fed. Like I said, man shall not live by bread alone. So people want to be fed and they want to gather somewhere. That's just part of it. And we'll do it in the safest way possible, just like we have done.
I think there's a drive-in movie theater not far from you, and I was actually wondering a couple of weeks ago if they might be allowed to reopen, but that might be your way forward here to accommodate this, because I'm noticing that there are a lot of people, even people that aren't particularly religious, this has just been anecdotal on my part, that are really starting to ask a lot of questions. And I think whenever there's a mass event like this, it does shake people's, not shake people's faith in a negative way, but I think can shake people's faith in a very positive way. And I'm wondering if you're seeing that, people reaching out to you that, aren't even necessarily religious and not even necessarily because of the drive-ins you've been doing, saying, you know what, I have questions right now, and I'm not sure that the world in its earthly sense is answering them.
That's exactly it. So we are taking all things into consideration right now to see where we could accommodate the people, because there's, as a pastor, as you can imagine, there's absolutely no way that we're going to turn people away. I realize that they don't want us to do it, but I also, on the other hand, clearly see our rights to do it if we do it within the confines of what the thing is that we're dealing with. So we're looking at all opportunities, see which way we could do it. Like I said, there's a strong support for it. Not just support, but people are flocking in, wanting to hear, because it's just not normal that we would cut it out like this.
And I know that we don't know how long this is going to last, how long the lockdown is going to go on. We've heard in the last few days a little bit of a discussion about, they call reopening the economy. And I find it interesting because no one's talking about reopening churches, which I would say are not part of the economy per se. But you're planning on doing this, it sounds like, as long as you need to.
That's exactly what troubles me so much when churches are put down as non-essential. They are number one. If we don't have God, we have nothing. If we lose God, we lose everything. So absolutely our church is essential. So they must come first. And then we see how we can accommodate everything else. I know not everybody would agree, but that is the way it is.
Joining me on the line, pastor of the Church of God in Elmer, Ontario, Pastor Henry Hildebrandt. Pastor, thank you so much for your time. God bless you and best of luck in your future drive-ins.
Gladly done. Lord bless you.
Thanks for listening to The Andrew Lawton Show. Support the program by donating to True North at www.tnc.news.